$120,000 a year. And on the 28th of the month, the account holds $312. Not because of a disaster. No hospital bill, no layoff, no gambling. Just a normal month, ending the way every normal month has ended for 4 straight years. That is the part nobody explains. The envelope is thin, which is the first surprise. Everyone pictures a thick one. It contains a single page printed in plain type, and the sentence that matters is the 4th one down. Our records differ from the information you reported. Not an accusation. A disagreement between 2 pieces of paper. The instinct is to imagine a person, someone in an office who opened your return, disliked something, and decided to look closer. That is almost never how it starts. Nothing in this process began with your return at all. It began with paperwork other people filed about you months earlier. Before you opened any software, before you gathered anything, a file with your name on it was already filling up. Not built by you, built by everyone who paid you, held your money, lent to you, or processed a transaction on your behalf. You are the last person to contribute to your own file. Your employer filed a copy of your wage statement with the government at the same moment they mailed yours. Same numbers, same date. There has never been a version of this where you report your salary and the system takes your word for it. The salary was reported twice, independently from the start. The bank reported the interest it paid you, down to the dollar. The brokerage reported every sale you made, and, in most cases, what you originally paid. The mortgage company reported the interest you sent them. None of these institutions asked your permission, because reporting is simply part of what they do. The rideshare app reported. The marketplace where he sold camera gear reported. The payment platform that handled a freelance invoice reported. Each one sent a copy to him and a copy to the system, and each one assumed he would remember receiving it 11 months later. Most people meet this system once a year and experience it as a refund. That single number becomes the entire relationship, which is why the machinery underneath stays invisible. A refund is not a gift, and it is not a verdict. It is the settlement of a difference between 2 figures already known to both sides. So picture what is really on the other side of that desk. Not a biography, not a judgment about whether you are a good person or a careful one. A stack of independent documents, filed by unrelated parties that either agree with each other or do not. That is the entire object. The first pass is not an investigation. It is a comparison. Does the number you wrote match the number somebody else wrote about you? When those 2 numbers agree, nothing happens, forever. When they disagree, something automatic happens, and it happens without anyone forming an opinion about you. This is the part that reduces the fear and increases the discipline at the same time. The comparison does not care that you were moving that year, or grieving, or working 2 jobs, or genuinely confused by a form you had never seen before. It is arithmetic. Arithmetic has no mood, which means the file is missing almost everything that makes the year comprehensible. It has no field for the reason. It cannot see that the extra income came from selling furniture during a hard winter, or that the missing form arrived at an old address. Motive is simply not one of the columns. Here is the actual disagreement, and it is smaller than the envelope suggests. $1,840. A single freelance invoice from a company that hired him for 1 week in March, paid in April, and filed the paperwork in January to an address he had left in November. He did not hide the money. He forgot it existed. Between the week itself and the following spring, there had been a move, a new job, and a child who stopped sleeping through the night. The system cannot tell the difference between concealment and a genuinely forgotten week. Neither can the letter. There is a second entry that never became a letter, and it should have worried him more. The winter he sold camera gear to cover a boiler replacement produced a platform document he also never saw. It happened to match what he reported, purely by accident, because he had guessed the total almost exactly right. That equivalence is the uncomfortable core of the whole system. A deliberate omission and an honest oversight produce exactly the same shape on paper. Both look like a gap. Nobody at any point in this process is required to guess which one you are, and the letter is worded identically either way. So the letter arrives and it is not a summons. It proposes a corrected figure and invites him to agree or explain. There is a deadline, a phone number, and a form. The whole thing has the emotional register of a utility bill, which is precisely why it feels so strange to receive. He spends 4 days not opening it. That detail matters more than the money. 4 days of a specific low-grade dread that affects sleep, patience, and one conversation with his wife that goes badly for no reason. The proposed adjustment turns out to be smaller than a monthly car payment. Now widen out, because the file looks completely different depending on how you earn. If every dollar you receive comes from one employer, your file is almost entirely written by somebody else. It is short, consistent, and it agrees with itself before you touch it. Transparency is the default setting. Add a side income, a brokerage account, a rental room, and a payment app, and the file stops being a lane. It becomes an intersection. 5 parties now describe pieces of your year, none of them talking to each other, all of them filing on different schedules to whatever address they last had. Higher up, the file changes character again. A business owner reports much of their own picture, with fewer independent parties describing it from the outside. Fewer automatic comparisons exist. This does not mean less scrutiny. It means the scrutiny cannot be done by simple matching, so it happens differently and slowly. Then there is the shape almost nobody plans for. 6 platforms, none of them a job, each paying irregularly and each filing on its own schedule. The person living this way often has the most complicated file in the building and the least support for understanding it. Complexity does not scale with income. Here is the sharper observation. The most visible people in this system are ordinary salaried workers, because almost everything about them is reported by a third party automatically. Visibility is a function of who else files paperwork about you. And that has very little to do with how much you earn, which points at something unglamorous and genuinely useful. The most protective habit here is not clever structuring. It is keeping a current address on file everywhere, and keeping one folder where every form that arrives goes immediately, unopened if necessary. Most disagreements are logistics failures wearing a serious envelope. His entire disagreement traces back to one unchanged address on one company's records. Not a decision about money, a form he never updated, with a client he worked for during a single week. $1,840 became a formal letter because a piece of mail went to a house he no longer owned. The resolution takes one phone call and one signature. He agrees with the figure because it is correct. He pays the difference and a small amount of interest. The entire event, from thin envelope to closed matter, occupies about 90 minutes of actual effort spread across 3 weeks of unnecessary worry. He had expected an interrogation. What he got was a clerk on a phone line who was courteous, faintly bored, and clearly having this identical conversation for the 11th time that day. She used the phrase common adjustment twice. Nothing about the exchange suggested he was interesting to anybody. That flatness is the design working correctly. A system that processes hundreds of millions of relationships cannot afford drama at this level. Most of what happens is a letter, a comparison, and a correction. The version people fear is real, but it lives at the far end of a long process, not at the mailbox. But sit with the other half of this. That file is also a portrait, assembled by strangers, and it is unnervingly accurate about the shape of a life. It knows the year he changed jobs. It knows the winter he sold things. It knows the month the second income started and the month it stopped. Nobody wrote that story. It emerged from filing dates. A gap in wage reporting is a period of unemployment. A sudden brokerage sale in the same month is a bill that had to be paid. The system is not reading his life, and yet the documents narrate it clearly to anyone who bothers to look. Move up the scale and the portrait changes shape rather than getting clearer. Wage income shows a life in monthly increments. Investment income shows a life in decisions, and decisions are much rarer. Someone living off capital may produce fewer documents in a year than a salaried worker produces in a month. This is not a loophole, and it is not a scandal. It is a structural fact about how income gets recorded. A paycheck creates paperwork every 2 weeks by design. A holding that simply sits there creates almost none until something is sold. The rules are identical. The paper trail is not, which explains something about silent wealth that has nothing to do with secrecy. People who hold rather than transact simply generate fewer records. They are not hiding. They are just less frequently described by other people's paperwork, and being described less often is quieter than any deliberate strategy. Every record in that file was created by a movement, a payment, a sale, a transfer, a settlement. Nothing in the file was generated by simply owning something. This is why activity and visibility rise together, and why the busiest financial life is also the most extensively documented one. After the correction, nothing else happens. No follow-up, no closer look, no lingering mark he can detect. The matter closes the way a resolved billing dispute closes. He keeps checking the mailbox for 2 months anyway, which is its own small commentary on how the first letter felt. One habit changes permanently. Every January, he now writes down every entity that paid him during the previous year, before any form arrives. It takes 11 minutes. It exists purely so that a forgotten week in March can never again become a formal letter in the following winter. Notice what he did not do. He did not restructure anything, form an entity, or start treating the system as an adversary to be outmaneuvered. The disagreement was caused by an address. The fix was a list. Complexity would have created more paperwork, and paperwork was already the entire problem. There is an entire content industry built on making this feel like a hunt. It sells because fear holds attention and because almost nobody has described the ordinary version. The ordinary version is a thin envelope, a mismatched figure, and a bored clerk on a Tuesday afternoon. It is worth being precise about who actually receives a second look because the fear is distributed almost backwards. Attention follows disagreement, not wealth. A modest return with 2 mismatched documents attracts more automatic process than a large one, where every figure lines up perfectly on the first pass. Still, there is a genuine asymmetry, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The system holds every document about you, and you hold only the ones you kept. When a disagreement arrives, you are reconstructing a year from memory, while the other side is reading it from paper. That gap is the whole disadvantage. Closing that gap costs 1 folder and 1 January afternoon. Not to outsmart anything, just so that when 2 pieces of paper disagree, you are the person who can produce the third piece that settles it. That is the entire defensive posture, and it fits inside a drawer. At the end of the call, the clerk said something he has thought about since. Most of these are address problems. Not fraud, not schemes, not clever people caught out. Address problems. A year of dread, resolved by a sentence that suggested he was the 11th unremarkable case of her shift. There are 2 ways to be quiet in this system, and only one of them is available to most people. One is structural, and belongs to those whose money mostly sits still. The other is administrative, and belongs to anyone with a current address and a folder. The second one is unglamorous, and it works. After the call, he remembers something. His father kept a brown accordion folder in a hall closet, and every January he moved it to the kitchen table for one afternoon. As a child, this looked like the dullest ritual in the house. It was, in fact, the entire defense, performed annually without comment. One last thing about that file. It does not get deleted at the end of the year. It accumulates. Decade by decade, it becomes a long, dry, extremely accurate record of every period you earned, paused, sold, borrowed, and recovered, written entirely by strangers who never intended to write your biography. Somewhere on that shelf is the year you would most want to explain, the one with the gap, the sale, the strange stretch of months. It sits there in plain type, without context, entirely accurate, and completely wrong about why. And no field exists anywhere in the system to correct that. When friends ask what to do about it, he gives an answer nobody enjoys. Keep your address current. Keep 1 folder. Open the envelope on the day it arrives. That is most of it. The rest is understanding that you are being compared, not judged, and that a comparison cannot be argued with emotionally. 2 years later, another thin envelope arrives. Same typeface, same weight, same 4th sentence. This time he opens it at the mailbox, checks it against the folder in the drawer, finds the matching document in under 4 minutes, and the disagreement ends before it becomes anything at all. So here is what is worth knowing. Right now, without any action from you, a file with your name on it is being written by employers, banks, platforms, and lenders who have never met you. It is accurate about the numbers and blind to the reasons. Which year in yours would you most want to explain?